The late afternoon sun was sinking over Willow Creek, a quiet suburban neighborhood where most folks knew each other by name. Children played in yards, parents watered gardens, and life carried on in a rhythm that felt almost timeless. At the end of Maple Lane stood the Parker home white siding, its blue shutters, and a giant oak tree that had stood for generations. 8-year-old Jacob Parker had always loved that oak. For him, it wasn't just a tree. It was an escape, a castle, a spaceship, and sometimes even a pirate ship. His father, Daniel, a construction worker with calloused hands and a heart of gold, had spent weekends building Jacob a treehouse up in its sturdy branches. Together, father and son hammered, painted, and laughed. The result was a small but sturdy wooden structure with a little window, a rope ladder, and a handmade sign that read Jacob's Fort, Jacob's mother. Emily often stood at the kitchen window, smiling as she watched her son climb into the treehouse. It was a place of joy, of imagination, and though none of them knew it, yet would soon be the center of a storm that would shake their quiet neighborhood. The Parkers weren't troublemakers. They paid their bills, kept their lawn tidy, and waved to neighbors on Sunday mornings. But they had one problem. Their property was under the jurisdiction of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. And among that HOA board was one woman, whose name struck irritation into almost every household on the block, Karen Whitmore. Karen was the self-proclaimed protector of neighborhood standards. With short, bleach blonde hair, oversized sunglasses, and a clipboard permanently attached to her arm, she patrolled the streets like a watchdog. If a lawn grew too high, she issued a citation. If a mailbox leaned an inch to the left, she demanded it be replaced. And when she spotted Jacob's treehouse visible from the sidewalk, she nearly had a meltdown. "This is an eyesore," Karen exclaimed one morning, her voice sharp as she jabbed a finger toward the oak. "It violates HOA regulations on unapproved structures." Daniel, standing in his driveway after a long day of work, tried to reason with her. "It's just a kid's treehouse. It's safe. It's not bothering anyone." But Karen wasn't listening. Her eyes narrowed, her lips pursed into a thin line, and she scribbled something furiously on her clipboard. "Rules are rules, Mr. Parker. That monstrosity must come down. I'll give you a week." Emily joined her husband, folding her arms. "Karen, it's a treehouse. For an 8-year-old boy, can't you let children be children?" Karen tilted her chin in that smug, superior way that made neighbors roll their eyes behind closed doors. "Children can play, but not at the expense of neighborhood property values. If you won't take it down, the HOA will." Jacob, overhearing the exchange from his treehouse window, felt his stomach sink. His little castle, the one he built with his dad, was suddenly in danger. Days passed. The Parkers didn't remove the treehouse. Daniel felt strongly. "My son deserves to have something of his own. It's safe. It's ours. She can't bully us like this." But Karen wasn't used to hearing the word no. On the 7th day, while the Parkers were inside making dinner, the sound of metal scraping against wood shattered the calm evening air. At first, Emily thought it was construction down the street. But then Jacob screamed, "Mom, Dad, she's cutting my treehouse." Daniel bolted outside, heart racing. And there, at the base of the oak tree, was Karen holding a large electric saw. Hacking into the wooden supports of Jacob's beloved fort, sawdust flew everywhere as the blade chewed through wood. "Karen, stop!" Daniel shouted, sprinting toward her, but it was too late. One of the beams cracked with a sickening snap. Jacob, who had been inside the treehouse when she started, screamed as the structure tilted. Daniel's eyes widened in horror. "Jacob, get out!" The boy scrambled, trying to reach the rope ladder, but the floor beneath him gave way. He fell, tumbling through the air, landing hard on the ground below. His cry of pain echoed through the neighborhood. Emily's scream pierced the night. She rushed to her son, tears streaming down her face, while Daniel turned on Karen with a fury he'd never felt before. "What did you do? He's a child," Daniel roared. But Karen, unbelievably, adjusted her sunglasses and muttered, "I warned you. You left me no choice." Neighbors gathered, some recording on their phones, others rushing to help. Jacob lay on the grass, clutching his arm, his face pale from pain. Emily cradled him, sobbing, while Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had already called 911, as flashing lights painted the neighborhood red and blue. Deputies surrounded the scene. Daniel was still shaking, his wife trembling beside him, their little boy being lifted onto a stretcher. Karen stood smugly at first, arms crossed, as though she had won some battle. But when deputies asked witnesses what happened, voices rose in unison. She did it. She cut it down while the boy was inside. She nearly killed him. She used a saw. It's all on camera. Karen's smirk faltered. The deputy turned to her, handcuffs ready. Ma'am, you're under arrest for reckless endangerment and assault on a minor. Karen's jaw dropped. What? You can't arrest me? I was enforcing HOA rules. But as they cuffed her and led her to the patrol car, Daniel whispered fiercely, You're going to pay for this. And for the first time, Karen realized she wasn't above the law. The ambulance ride was a blur. Emily sat in the back, gripping Jacob's small hand, while paramedics worked quickly, checking his breathing, stabilizing his arm, and strapping him to the gurney. His face was pale, streaked with tears, but he tried to be brave. Mom, is my treehouse gone? He whispered, his voice weak. Emily's heart cracked. She smoothed his hair and kissed his forehead. Sweetheart, don't you worry about the treehouse. Right now, we're just going to get you better. Meanwhile, Donald drove behind the ambulance, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His mind replayed the moment over and over. Karen with that saw, the sound of wood splintering, Jacob's scream as he fell. Every nerve in his body buzzed with rage, but under it all was fear that his little boy might not be okay at the hospital. Doctors confirmed Jacob had suffered a broken arm and a mild concussion. He's lucky, the doctor explained softly. It could have been much worse. Another foot higher, or a different angle. And we'd be talking about far more serious injuries. Emily broke down in tears. Daniel wrapped his arms around her, fighting his own emotions. He's strong, Daniel whispered. He's going to be okay, when Jacob finally drifted into a medicated sleep. The Parkers stepped into the hallway, where a deputy was waiting. Sheriff's Deputy Collins, a steady man with graying hair and a calm presence, approached them. Mr. and Mrs. Parker, he began, his voice firm but kind, we've taken Ms. Whitmore into custody. She's being charged with felony assault and reckless endangerment of a child. Several neighbors gave statements, and we've got video footage of the whole incident. She can't talk her way out of this. Daniel let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Emily, still trembling, asked, but she's always been protected by the HOA. She'll find some loophole, won't she? Deputy Collins shook his head. The HOA doesn't override state law. She put your child's life in danger. That's a line no board or regulation can excuse. She'll face a judge just like anyone else. That night, word spread quickly through Willow Creek. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down out of fear of Karen's wrath were now buzzing with outrage. On front porches, over fences, and in whispered phone calls, the story spread. Did you hear? Karen cut down the Parker boys' treehouse with him still in it. Unbelievable. She's gone too far this time. I always knew she was power-hungry. But this is criminal. By morning, social media was ablaze with posts from neighbors and locals. Clips of the incident, recorded on cell phones, circulated, showing Karen wielding the saw as Jacob screamed. Hashtags began trending in nearby towns, hashtag Justice for Jacob and hashtag HOA Karen. The HOA board, caught in the firestorm, scrambled to distance themselves from Karen. An emergency statement was released. The Willow Creek Homeowners Association does not condone the actions of board member Karen Whitmore. Her behavior was independent of the HOA and does not reflect our community values. But it was too late. The damage to the HOA's reputation was done. For years, neighbors had grumbled about Karen's heavy-handed enforcement of rules, her fines for trivial issues, and her condescending tone. Now, her reckless act had crossed into criminal territory. People were no longer afraid to speak up. At the hospital, the Parkers received an outpouring of support. Neighbors dropped off food, balloons, and cards for Jacob. Some even stopped by in person. Mrs. Jenkins from across the street, who had often been fined by Karen for leaving her trash bins out an extra hour, clutched Emily's hand and said, "She won't get away with this. Not this time." "The whole neighborhood's behind you," Daniel, usually a quiet and reserved man, found himself speaking more than he ever had before. Standing in the hospital lobby, he told a group of neighbors, Karen thought she was above the law. She thought her rules mattered more than our children's safety. But no more. This isn't just about Jacob. This is about stopping her from ever hurting anyone else again. Meanwhile, Karen sat in a holding cell at the county jail. For once, the confident smirk was gone. She paced, muttering about rules and standards, insisting to anyone who would listen that she was just enforcing regulations. But the deputies weren't swayed. One of them, shaking his head, told her bluntly, "Lady, this isn't about rules. You put a kid in the hospital. That's all that matters now." The Parkers didn't sleep much that night. Emily sat by Jacob's bed, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest, while Daniel stared out the window, thinking about the trial ahead. He knew this wasn't over. Karen had money, influence, and a knack for manipulation. She would fight tooth and nail to avoid consequences. But for the first time, the Parkers weren't alone. The neighborhood was rallying. The sheriff's office was taking it seriously. And Karen, for all her bluster, was facing charges she couldn't just brush aside. As the hospital halls quieted and the clock ticked past midnight, Daniel whispered a promise to his son. "Don't you worry, buddy. We'll rebuild. And this time, no one will ever take it from you." Jacob stirred in his sleep, his tiny hand twitching in Daniel's palm. The battle wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The day of Karen's arraignment dawned gray and heavy, as though the sky itself mirrored the tension in Willow Creek. Outside the county courthouse, news vans lined the street. Reporters clutched microphones, snapping photos as neighbors gathered in clusters. The story of HOA Karen versus the Treehouse Kid had spread far beyond their little neighborhood, becoming a regional and now almost national headline. Inside, Daniel and Emily sat together, hands entwined. Jacob, still sporting a cast on his arm, was excused from attending. But he'd asked a question that morning that stayed with Daniel. "Dad, will she have to say sorry to me?" Daniel hadn't known how to answer. The courtroom filled quickly. On one side sat the Parkers and dozens of neighbors who had come to support them. On the other sat Karen, dressed in a stiff gray suit, her blonde hair pulled back tightly. She didn't look like the smug woman with the saw anymore, but the defiance in her eyes hadn't dimmed. When the judge entered, everyone rose. "This court is now in session." The prosecutor wasted no time. Rising with measured authority, she addressed the judge. "Your Honor, this case is simple. The defendant, Miss Whitmore, willfully and recklessly endangered the life of a minor child. Despite warnings, despite pleas from the child's parents, she took it upon herself to use a power saw to destroy a treehouse while an 8-year-old boy was inside. That boy suffered a broken arm and a concussion. We are pursuing charges of felony assault and reckless endangerment." A murmur swept through the gallery. Daniel squeezed Emily's hand, his jaw tight. Then Karen's defense attorney stood. He was slick, polished, and full of the kind of confidence that came with expensive retainers. "Your Honor, while this incident is regrettable, my client was simply enforcing the rules of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. She believed the structure was unsafe and in violation of community bylaws. Her intent was not malicious, but protective of the neighborhood's integrity. This was not a crime. It was a misunderstanding." Daniel's blood boiled. A misunderstanding? His son's broken bones were not a misunderstanding. Witnesses were called. Mrs. Jenkins took the stand first, her voice trembling with outrage. "I saw it with my own eyes." She had the saw in her hands. She didn't care that Jacob was inside. We begged her to stop. She kept cutting until it collapsed. Next came a neighbor's teenage son who had filmed the incident. The video played on the courtroom screen. filling the silent chamber with the sound of the saw's vicious whir and Jacob's terrified scream. Emily buried her face in Daniel's shoulder. Several jurors looked shaken. Even the judge's lips pressed into a thin line as the footage rolled. Karen, however, sat stiffly, her eyes darting between the screen and the jury. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed her face. When it was Daniel's turn to testify, he walked slowly to the stand, every step heavy with the weight of a father's fury. His voice was low but steady. My son thought that Treehouse was his castle. We built it together. He was inside it when he paused, swallowing hard. When she cut it down, I yelled at her to stop. She didn't care. My boy could have died. And she thinks this was just about rules? His words hung in the air. Some jurors nodded almost imperceptibly, moved by the raw emotion in his voice. Then, against her lawyer's advice, Karen insisted on speaking. Rising from her seat, she addressed the court with her chin raised. This whole thing has been blown out of proportion. That treehouse was an eyesore. It was against HOA rules. If the parents had listened to me, none of this would have happened. I was right to enforce the rules. I always am. And if I had to do it again, gasps erupted across the courtroom. Her lawyer frantically tugged at her sleeve, but the damage was done. The jury's faces hardened. The judge's gavel struck, calling for order. Daniel could hardly believe her arrogance. Emily whispered, "She doesn't feel any remorse. Not 1 ounce." The prosecutor seized the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, you just heard it from her own mouth. She admits she would do it again. This was no accident. No misunderstanding. This was recklessness bordering on cruelty." By the time closing arguments ended, the air in the courtroom was electric with tension. The jury would deliberate, but to many in the gallery, the verdict seemed clear. Outside, reporters swarmed, peppering Daniel and Emily with questions. Emily held her ground, her voice strong. "We're not here for headlines. We're here for justice for Jacob, for every family that's been bullied by someone who thinks they're above the law." Meanwhile, the HOA scrambled in panic. With Karen's face plastered across the evening news, homeowners demanded answers. Emergency meetings were called. Some board members resigned outright, unwilling to be associated with her. For the first time, the very institution Karen had used as her weapon was crumbling beneath her feet. And in the Parker household that night, Daniel sat by Jacob's bedside, watching his son sleep peacefully. He whispered again the promise he'd made before. "We'll rebuild, buddy. This time stronger. And no one will ever take it from you again." But as he spoke, he knew the fight wasn't over. The verdict was still to come, and Karen Whitmore wasn't the type to go down quietly. The jury deliberated for nearly 5 hours. Each minute felt like an eternity for the Parkers. Daniel paced the courthouse hallway while Emily sat, hands clasped tightly in her lap, whispering prayers under her breath. Finally, the bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise." The jury filed back into the courtroom, solemn and serious. The foreman stood, holding the slip of paper that carried the Parkers' hopes, fears, and months of pain. The judge's voice cut through the silence. "On the charge of felony assault, how do you find the defendant?" The foreman's voice was clear. "Guilty." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Emily gripped Daniel's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. Tears filled her eyes, not of fear, but of relief. The judge continued. "On the charge of reckless endangerment of a minor?" "Guilty." Karen's face drained of color. She shook her head violently, sputtering, No, this isn't right. I was doing my duty. You can't punish me for protecting property values." The gavel slammed down. Order in the court. The judge's eyes were cold. "Miss Whitmore, you put a child's life at risk. You willfully destroyed property, ignored warnings, and endangered an innocent boy. This court sentences you to 2 years in state prison, followed by probation." The courtroom erupted, some in gasps, others in quiet applause. For once, the balance of power in Willow Creek had shifted. Karen Whitmore, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, was led away in handcuffs. Her defiance cracked at last, her pleas falling on deaf ears. Outside, reporters swarmed the Parkers once more. But this time, Daniel spoke with calm resolve. Justice was served today. My son's life mattered more than her rules. This is a message to anyone who thinks they can bully. Families behind the shield of authority, you're not above the law. Neighbors cheered. Mrs. Jenkins, tears in her eyes, hugged Emily and whispered, "You stood up for all of us." In the weeks that followed, Willow Creek began to heal. The HOA board restructured, promising transparency and fairness. Several homeowners who had long suffered under Karen's iron grip finally felt free to breathe again. But the most healing moment came at the Parker home. One crisp Saturday morning, Daniel and Jacob stood once more beneath the towering oak tree. The old treehouse was gone, but the oak remained strong and steady, its branches stretching toward the sky. "Ready to try again, buddy?" Daniel asked, holding a hammer in one hand. Jacob grinned, his cast finally off, his spirit unbroken. "Yeah, Dad, let's build it even bigger this time." Neighbors pitched in, bringing wood, nails, and paint. Ladders were propped against the trunk, and laughter filled the yard as the community worked together. The new treehouse rose higher, sturdier, and brighter than before, a symbol of resilience, unity, and a neighborhood taking back its peace. When it was finished, Jacob climbed the rope ladder and peered out the little window. His eyes sparkled as he looked down at his parents. "This is the best treehouse ever." Emily wiped away a tear, smiling at Daniel. "We did it. He's safe. He's happy. And she can never hurt him again." That evening, as the sun dipped low and the oak cast long shadows across the yard, Daniel sat on the porch with Emily. Their son laughing in the branches above, the nightmare was over. The scars would remain, but so would the lessons. And in Willow Creek, people no longer whispered about HOA Karen. They told the story of the Parkers, their courage, and how one family's fight for justice changed an entire community. For Jacob, the treehouse wasn't just wood and nails anymore. It was proof that good people could stand up against bullies and win.